I don't think people today realize how mathematical and detailed the whole construction of pages was, and still is. It's just done behind the scenes for you automatically.
It must be obvious now to those of us employed in the graphic arts that we will, in the next 5 years, undergo more changes than any other industry in the history of our country.
Your original question was, tell me about the typesetting process. It's part of a much larger picture.
If you look at the evolution of printing, there were many reasons why photo typesetting overtook hot metal.
For it is by tape that future equipment will be reached.
You would ring the typesetter, you would name your typeface, you would read the text over, and you would get it back.
There was no WYSIWYG. You couldn't see what you were doing. It was just a bunch of codes.
Sometimes it came back the way you envisioned it, and sometimes it didn't.
The important thing is not to panic. Whatever you've lost, it's around here somewhere.
I hated doing paste up. I was terrible at it.
Today, the printed word is expressed and executed with technological advancements never dreamed possible even a few years ago.
Any new technology is always going to have reactionaries, and it's going to have experimenters, and it's kind of wonderful to see both things come together.
It's amazing how quickly the technology changed from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s.
Hello, I am Macintosh.
All of that old technology just gone.
Well, what are you going to call this new invention? I blurted out, well, we might call it desktop publishing.
Being able to directly manipulate type, photography, color, that's what it's all about. That's the revolution.
You could actually design a typeface on a lark.
This is the first one that I did, this one, block.
Up until 1960, 70, if Gutenberg came back, Gutenberg would have been comfortable in that studio.
The studio now, well, the amazing thing is, this is the studio. That's it.
John, would you mind going first since you're in the middle seat?
I'm John Walker. I am a retired graphic design professor from Illinois State University. I started in 1985, and second half of my career was in administration at ISU. But I started in design as an undergraduate in 1977 in Louisiana, and we were just talking, just lived all of that, you know, and from multiple perspectives and angles. So I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for presenting this to the community, Paul.
Most of the time we like to have people different ages, but for this film, I'm sorry. Laura?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm in the same age group. I graduated actually in Paul's group around 84 or so from the University of Illinois, and I've worked here locally, mainly at the University of Illinois for WILO broadcasting, and as well as other U of I departments and area commercial businesses as well.
Didn't you retire recently?
I did retire, so I just really had no idea how much I had actually experienced until I watched this film. Yeah, it really covered a lot of territory. And as you're working, you don't dwell on that. You're just kind of keeping up. Some things are classic, though.
I'm Jack Davis, freelance designer since '74. First job in '68 at the U of I. So yeah, this was my story. I'm probably the oldest one up here.
You're looking at me like you don't know for sure.
Well, no, I know. He's just prematurely white.
Right.
He's really in his 30s.
That's exactly it.
And you're still working now, aren't you, Jack?
I am, yeah.
Okay, so
Well,
there's no retirement for freelancers, is there?
If it's still fun, why not do it, right?
Yeah.
Hey, how are you? I'm Al Fleener. I got my start, actually graduated from Parkland College. I think it was '83, it could have been '84, somewhere around there. I've been working in graphic design ever since, and most recently, and recently being, I guess, 13 or 14 years ago now, founded a marketing and design firm in this area called Surface 51. And all of this brought back memories. I wouldn't call them all great, but yeah, memories.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Al, you never went on to school. You never went beyond Parkland.
You always like to bring that up every time we talk. I feel like this is a routine.
No, we're very proud of him. Okay, he's a Parkland associate's degree graduate,
Yeah,
and look where you are now.
Yeah, I was talking to some people earlier tonight. I actually started at Illinois State University, was asked to leave after a semester, and then came to Parkland and graduated from here. So it all worked out.
Okay, great. Okay, and I'm Paul Young. I'm the program director for graphic design at Parkland College, and I'm very pleased to have these wonderful friends here. And let's see who's on Skype these days. Will, show us.
Hi.
Hello. Welcome to Champaign. Okay. On the right is Bryan Levitt. On the left is April Greiman. You guys are in California, is that right?
Pretty much. But different parts.
Great. Could you please say a few things about yourself? We're very happy to have you here, nice and big on screen.
You go first, April.
Oh, okay. A few things about myself. I got up really grumpy today, so I put on a bright red t-shirt, and it really helped. I am a designer and do some photography, and I have a small studio called Made in Space, where I'm right now sitting. Everybody else has gone home. Yeah, kind of it. I was born in New York, accidentally moved to Los Angeles some years ago. That's kind of the pertinent stuff.
Well, thanks for being in the film. So we just saw several interview clips of you, and one, you look marvelous, in my opinion. And thank you for being so insightful. Okay. And Bryan, as I understand it, this is your first film, is that correct?
I can't see you, though. That's so sad.
Really?
Yeah, we can't see you.
There is a camera here. Will, do you want to take a look at the camera? Okay.
I see a gentleman with a beard, and I see Bryan, and I see a lady with like a disc at the bottom of my screen.
Uh-huh.
See, that exists.
So you do see some people, we just can't quite make out the faces.
Yeah.
Well, let Will, our tech, take a look at the camera. But Bryan, tell us how it feels to make the first film. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's. Oh, there you are. Yeah, it's this unusual experience. I did never think I was going to make a movie, and I'm actually in the back. I'm in a projection room right now at a movie theater in San Francisco, because I'm at a screening for at a little theater here in San Francisco, which is kind of fun to see an old school screening room, actually, or projection room rather. But yeah, it's not something I ever set out to do in the beginning. I think of myself as a designer first, and but that seemed like the best way to tell this story.
Locally over here, how about we give Bryan some feedback, comments on her film, since it's still fresh in our minds. I guess I'll start and I'll just move down to Al. So Bryan, you've just changed the way we're going to teach graphic design history from now on, because you filled a gap that badly needed filling. It's going to make its life so much easier for professors in every graphic design school around the country. What I love most about the film is who you chose to interview, okay, and the candidness of the way they spoke to you, and also love the infographics, the really handmade, yeah, just really cute, moving little things in black and white. Okay, Al?
Yeah, thanks. It was really wonderful. Interestingly enough, I was just having a conversation today with one of my colleagues who's here tonight, Christy Gillespie in the audience. I was telling her about going through a time period in design in my career that actually I have to appreciate you've labeled, and I didn't realize it was called the hybrid era. I was describing how for a while we didn't exactly even think about creating everything on our computer. We would do certain things on the computer, and then we would print it out, and then we would paste up parts of it. We would step and repeat things on a computer, and so thanks for coining that. That was a standout part for me.
Oh, yeah. And Jack, do you have anything you want to comment on?
I think that, it was extremely interesting. It brought back a lot of memories, a lot of nostalgia. Although it seemed to, it did gloss over some of that stuff, it seemed at the time it was a lot more complicated. But that was all I had right now.
I hope to get more detail in a book.
Nice. So there will be a follow-up book. Excellent. Good idea.
But only so much I can get in 85 minutes.
Yeah, sure.
Well, and that was my point, Briar. I thought you did a great job of covering a huge amount of territory, and I loved the way the client input was referred to, because that certainly affected both pre-digital and digital solutions, problems, so that's what I appreciated. Might have wanted to see a little bit of that, just to maybe address how the digital area handles client input, which, as commercial artists, is, of course, central to what we do. So, great job. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
I thought it was just tremendous fun. I mean, it was kind of the first thing I thought it was. I was smiling through much of it, partly because it was so relatable. And I think one of the things that I got from it, having crossed over that gap, that time period, is how how many common experiences there were from people all over the country doing the same thing. And I was thought, well, it'd be a great story to tell about when I would take a pay stub to the printer, and if it was in the summertime, I would have to worry about it melting in the car, so you had to, but someone already told that story in the film, so I said, okay, I wasn't the only one, but it was that kind of experience, and I said, yeah, I know exactly what that's about, and it was, and also I taught design history too, and I wish I had this film. During that, because that is a time that, it's hard to cover that period, even if you can pull out artifacts that I might have been able to pull out in the class, there's not, the whole process is difficult to explain, and I thought this was as good as a job you could probably do in 85 minutes.
Yeah, well, I thought something that was interesting was how much I had either forgotten or just buried, because I'm like, really, I don't want to go back to that.
Yeah.
One of the things, you're from a certain time period in graphic design when you know that, you can feel that technical pin shake that you get up, you're just starting your day and you're like shaking that thing to make sure you're not having to put it back in the cleaner and get the whole thing, bending the little needle on the end of it or whatever every single.
Forgot to turn the wax around.
Exactly. Or that watching that cake of wax melt like butter. Oh man, I can remember just being mesmerized by that. What are you doing? I'm in here watching the wax melt. Doing something.
Somebody would steal your rubber cement pickup.
Oh yeah.
So April, you're the star of this movie. So how did you get into the film, Bryan and April? How did you connect?
I mean, how did I get in showbiz? I didn't know I was the star, but I think Bryan contacted me to just get some work, and I just said, wait a minute, I think I should tell a story about how the bridge between, I know how to handset type and run a proving press, and, from my Basel education, and how, I ended up being, the pioneer, if you will, of new technology. So I kind of intimated that maybe I could talk to her about that, and then before I knew it, she and her crew of one were here for a whole day entertaining me, and it was good. So, but Bryan, she may have her own version of the story.
She took good care of us, actually.
What do we have, beers or tequila or something like that?
But was an obvious top choice to speak to about what it was like to make that transition and to push that technical tool when not everyone was doing that, I guess. When some people were just trying to replicate exactly what they were already doing with their hands. So that was a no-brainer. I was very lucky that she agreed to be interviewed, and she agreed to let me put more and more work. I kept asking her for more images.
That's
and
true.
She obliged.
Are we finished yet?
Yeah.
So, Bryan, you said it in the press release that you had an all-female crew on this. So, what was the reason for that?
Well, as you know, and as you can, as you probably have heard, the film industry has a problem with the percentage of women behind the camera. It also has lots of problems, obviously, with sex politics that we're seeing right now, but we won't get into that. But I thought, well, I'm in a position to make a choice, so why wouldn't I make this choice now? That's how you make systemic changes, is when you have a moment like this, when you have the time, or when you have a position to make this decision, why not? So that's why I did it.
Makes sense. And April, how do you feel about being one of the very, very few female designers recorded in the history books?
Well, it's an honor, and yeah, it's an honor. I don't know how that happened. I'm just lucky.
It's interesting, when I was in college, and I just wrote a blog about this, so I'll send you a link, that I actually discovered you and tried to imitate you, but I failed because I didn't understand postmodernism, and I didn't understand why you would do what you did. So it wasn't until years later, okay, that I understood the whole enjoyment of breaking rules, of finding what you're supposed to do and deliberately not do it. So now I think I get it a little bit more.
Well, I never knew what postmodernism was either. And as I say, I never knew there were rules to be broken. I just was doing what I did. And in fact, there was a really interesting exhibition, a major exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum a few years ago on postmodernism, which followed their show on modernism. And I was hesitant to be interviewed or be part of that because I hated the term postmodernism, because it kind of pigeonholed me for something that I didn't identify with. But it was interesting when they finally talked about the exhibition, the curators, and I finally succumbed. It was because they said they had interviewed a dozen people, and no two people said the same thing about postmodernism. Is that me speaking in tongue?
Yeah.
Just like, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so anyway,
and also, Bryan, you mentioned...
I don't know what rules you broke, but why don't you send me some examples?
Sure, I'll be happy to. You also, Bryan, you mentioned that California New Wave was another label that was applied to that period, especially what you were doing in April. Do you like that label any better?
I only like it when I found out what the original term comes from French, which is nouveau vague, which means new, vague. And that made sense to me, like it was vague. And yeah, that made total sense to me because, it was all pretty vague what was going on, and, people talking about rules being broken. And I mean, I think the only thing about California that you could say that was different than any other new wave was probably the explosion of color. And that would make sense, particularly from Southern California, where, every other house is pink or yellow, so you have a really, a really colorful, natural environment. But what do you think, Bryan?
Well, I I feel like there is something about California that does inspire that. So just from reading Louise Sandhaus's book, I see a pattern. It's not that they can be pigeonholed by style, but I think you're right. Color, exuberance, not serious, not taking too serious.
I think, it's also the industries that we predominantly serve, particularly Southern California, which is the entertainment business, the tech business. So those are fields that are progressive and probably allow for more freedom in the expression of their, of design work that you could do for them. But for me too, space is a big thing, and I think that New Wave, a lot of the, having word become image and exploring space in all forms and all mediums is really something that happened more here than other places. Just like, there is more space out here, sort of.
Open area.
So while we have you guys on screen on the stage, do you guys have any questions for April or Bryan since they're here?
Breyer's got more answers.
I don't think so.
Come on, Bryan, you do.
This question is for April. How would you describe the difference in your images, in your image making, pre-digital and after computers were the new tool? Because I'm curious if you were breaking the rules before the computer, I guess, is one specific way of putting it.
What do you mean by images, though?
Oh, your image making was the computer as a tool really central to your imagery?
A big part of my undergraduate education was in photography and graphic design. So photography was always something that was kind of going on simultaneously, and exploring new tools. Like I went crazy when I got an SX70 of the Polaroid camera. Like that was like breakthrough. I actually, prior to a really important detail and something people won't know, is prior to being really active with the computer, I got involved with professional video equipment, which I own. And so that was probably one of the bigger influences, because I could be shooting video and imagery in real time, in real space, and also have, so I was working in more dimensions than I had. And then I worked in video paint boxes, which were $1 million computers before the Mac came out. So it was really kind of that hybridization of traditional photography, and then videography and computer hybridization of those things. And then finally, when digital cameras came out, I never even thought of it as a camera, thought of it as like an accessory to my computer. So I don't know if I answered the question, but there's a lineage of development of technology for me that then became this imagery that I make, I guess.
Sure, I almost picture you playing or experimenting in the old-fashioned dark rooms, and then, the computer was just a continuation of that spirit, yeah.
Yeah, I had to learn to make my own prints. I made my own pinhole camera. It was pretty much a disaster, but...
Thank you.
Anything else from up here at the panel? Okay. I do remember April was here, 10, 15 years ago in Champaign, gave a talk, etc. And I do remember, April, you gave out little fortune cookie strips of paper that said, if thinking, think nothing.
Oh.
And I've contemplated that for many years. Do you want to elaborate on why you gave out those little strips of paper?
Probably be. First of all, is your hair a lot longer since I last saw you? Are you like becoming an aging hippie suddenly, or what's going on? Okay, no, it was a phrase that, here's how it goes. It says, no thinking, if thinking, think nothing. let that sink in a little bit. So it was more, it was kind of a bit of a graphic homage to, or typographic homage to something Zen, like, you know, not thinking all the time. And if thinking, think nothing.
Who's the hippie now, April?
What's that?
I said, who's the hippie now?
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm really, really an aging hippie and really late into it. But
I've always imagined that has something to do with your design philosophy as well as living philosophy. Often graphic design for me is not emotional at all, and it's completely logical. Yet I think by turning off your brain, you begin to feel more, and that's what I see in your work. So, but I imagine the connection, never bother asking you.
yeah, I think, you know, I accidentally moved to Los Angeles. I came out here to work on a project, and then within a year I had discovered the desert and, you know, kind of the peace of mind through vastness of space. And that's when that no thinking was just like, you know, I live here because if I go to the desert, or I mean, this can happen at the ocean and this can happen in the forest, where you have a really strong natural and exquisite environment that somehow a lot of the chatter kind of slows down in your head. And so you can actually not have to be thinking all the time. But if you are thinking, think nothing.
Okay, back to the panels here locally. Do you guys have any other stories that could be inspired by the film or things that you want to share with the audience from the old days?
The old days.
My first job, I hadn't graduated yet. I was just a production artist, and I think within a week I was in the emergency room with a cut from a mat knife.
Yeah. Yeah, I think all of us have spilled blood sooner or later.
I have a big one on my thigh, my left thigh.
Oh my gosh!
Because I had a mat knife on my drafting table, which, you know, was leaning up, and as I cut the mat, it slid off the bottom and just sliced right through my jeans and into my left thigh. I got compliments on that for having a really easy cut to stitch up, because it was an exact, you know, a mat knife with a really sharp blade. Yeah. Yeah. And the director of our program, Roy Kelly, his name was, Kansas City, everybody was screaming because there was so much blood in the dorm. And so they said, somebody's going to take you to the hospital. And when I went outside, it was the director of our program. So as soon as I got in the car, he said, I hope you don't think you're going to get out of your final reviews with this. Seriously. So I was not unhappy that there was blood all over the front seat, and he would have to. Sorry to digress.
No.
I'd like to know from my fellow panelists what, as being an educator for so long and beginning my career in education and as a designer during the time of ruling pens and technical pens and all the tools we saw, one of the projects that I first did in undergraduate school were these boxes that we had to draw precisely, and it was a very technical rendering exercise on how to use tools, but it was also probably more so a exercise in learning to see and paying attention to detail, where you had to measure precisely and every mistake was circled, and it was very difficult to get an A on that project. And I carried that project along because I felt at that time, when those were the tools we were using, you need to learn the tools, but in reflection, it was as much about learning how to see and seeing detail and paying attention to things that designers pay attention to, every little space and the alignment of this and the perfection of that circle and the weight of that line compared to the weight of this line and so on. So my question, I'm sorry, apologize for the long introduction to the question, but is, do you think there is a difference now in the way that designers see things in terms of that type of details, or that like the line isn't precious anymore. You're talking about in there, people being very proud of the line that they made. And are those things just not precious, or do designers not? Do we take the certain things differently than we used to? If you understand the question in there.
Yeah, I'll jump into that. So I was just having a conversation about this very thing at work in a kind of a different way. I was talking about how I think some of my decision-making process was grounded in working with tools that were very tactile, where you had to make decisions and see that decision in your head and then make that decision. So for instance, I was talking about drawing a rectangle. It wasn't just Illustrator, click here, pull to here, see how it looks. It was rule it, pencil it in, ink it, touch it up. I hope to hell I made it the right size because I don't want to do that again. And so one of the interesting things that's been interesting to me to watch other designers, I don't know, I'm not even thinking of it as good or bad. I think it's just different. Sometimes I'll go to a designer's desk when I'm reviewing their work, and I'll just see page after page after page of nuanced decisions, like in this one, what do you think about this? What do you think? And my head doesn't go to that. My head goes to, I made a couple decisions and I chose this direction and I kept going and I made that decision. So I don't know if for me it's so much about have we lost anything in the preciousness of the line weight or how you arrived at that. I think there was a whole lot of pride I took in going back in with the whiteout and touching up that one little box. You could take a lot of pleasure in when you did it right. However, I do think it led to, some of that time period led to a different way of thinking for me and how I apply my craft to what I do. If that makes sense.
Yeah, for me, the computer is still a tool. It doesn't really matter to me whether it's a tactile tool or something that's digital. But the way I've trained myself, I guess, is back to old school training when things were slower, is I had to visualize. I can imagine what the finished product is. Sometimes I would imagine with sketches. Sometimes I would imagine with a mechanical, with layers, and would make adjustments that way. But because I can see things in my head before they actually make them, I make fewer things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes you couldn't see them before.
Yeah.
I agree with all of my panelists. However, speaking of attention to detail, now I agonize over 0.5 rule or 0.6 rule or 12.2 type or 12.7 point type. Yeah. So exactly. And a colleague once said, God is in the details. I think that's true. I think you can refine and perfect. You can obsess too, but I think it's a bonus.
Mm-hmm. It's so easy to do so many iterations of a project.
Nuance was the correct word, nuance.
Mm-hmm. So, Bryan, I would like to share one other little story, which I think would have been great in your film. And you may have even talked to some people that mentioned a company called Speed Graphics. This is after graduation. I moved to New York. And there's one company in Manhattan that specialized on getting type from the typesetter to the studio, being an agency in-house. And they were bike messengers, all-weather bike messengers. And they were fast, which in New York City, you had to be to get the project to the right place. So that was, your film did bring up that memory because Speed Graphics is just sort of ingrained in anyone who worked in New York during that time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that that kind of stuff, it's funny how it can just trigger like this whole pathway of connections. And that was a hard thing, is where do I stop? Because when I was making the film, I didn't know if I should cover printing or not. At first I didn't have anything about the printing process, really. I thought I'll stop with the mechanical, but then I realized, no, that's too isolated. But yeah, it is interesting how it's such a web, and there's so many connections.
Okay. At this point, I think we should open up questions to the audience. So, Deborah, my mic wrangler, you're up. If you have any questions for anybody, ask Deborah to give you the mic.
I see a hand back here?
Oh my God, no one wants to talk to Bryan, no one wants to talk to April.
So shy.
Hi, thank you for your movie. I loved it quite a bit. Relived a lot of memories when I saw them on the screen. I can remember a time when the details of the craftsmanship of layouts was really important. Are the corners square? Is the wax even and the lines straight? And I get so caught up in the craftsmanship of the design, sometimes the creativity took a back seat because it was just all about making a nice clean paste up. And I don't know whether the computers helped creativity come to the forefront because it's much easier to produce something, and your time and energy could be more spent on the idea rather than on the actual execution. And I don't know whether or not you talk to different designers and different people during the making of the movie that reiterated that transition from craftsmanship to creativity.
Are you asking?
Did you hear a lot about that when you're talking to different designers that come up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you would find that Ellen Lupton would agree that, or say that the computer absolutely made it easier for her creative process, that it's a smoother process for her. And there are a few folks who found that it actually they don't care for it. But most people that I interviewed would say that the speed at which the computer allows them to work is a benefit, and that they would not go back. So that's the overwhelming feeling that I got from people that I interviewed. If that answers your question.
Who's next? Let's see a raised hand. Deborah, right behind you.
So this will be a question for April, actually. We've seen through the movie as well as in design history, which I'm in right now, and I actually just gave a presentation on postmodernism, kind of what inspired you in the past. What inspires you currently?
Oh. I'm spending about a third of my time working on photographic imagery and videos, more as a fine art endeavor. And I'm inspired to kind of put information into space, and particularly the built environment. So I've enjoyed some projects which are larger scale and collaborating with, architects to not only work on color palettes, but color and materials palettes. So I got the bug for, working bigger and having the experience of not doing something so ephemeral as a printed piece, and to think about how color in particular, color and materials, how much they influence the quality of our life. So working on bigger buildings where I'm the colorist, and so I heard recently that colorist people think that I do hair color or something, but just working as a color consultant for the built environment, and that's kind of exciting for me to actually, have the experience of inhabiting a real space and having a direct experience of that, of what it's like to be in a larger scale, color palette.
Yeah.
Good. And next. Okay.
In 1954, I answered an ad for a commercial artist, which the term gradually changed to graphic design. But the firm that I went to work for had 5 male commercial artists and 20 female paste-up or production people. The biggest invention that came along to my I mean, my celebration was when wax came and replaced rubber cement. For 4 years, I had a can of rubber cement with a cone top and a brush in it right next to my desk. And then we also had feeler gauges that a mechanic would use on spark plugs that we used for our ruling pins, so that when we did a chart or graph, we knew what thickness to set the ruling pin at. So when the rapidograph came out, it was another hallelujah day, you know. You kind of glossed over those 2 periods in your film, and it seemed like to me those were an eternity.
I'm sorry. I will cover those in my book.
The other thing that I remember, if I had to do a chart on African animals, from a monkey to a giraffe, and we had a lady who was George Will's mother, ran to the University of Illinois library and brought me back books of all the animals so that I could get the right sizes of a monkey and a giraffe to do this graft. And then along came clip art, and Mrs. Wills didn't have a job anymore. It was a rather refreshing film for me, and it brought back a lot of old memories. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.
I just want to say something too. The film brought back incredible memories, including like having like a stat camera or whatever that had arc lights. We had a special room for that. I completely forgot till you showed that in the film, Bryan. And I don't know who ran it, because to this day I have no idea how we did that and why we did that in my studio. But I was also going to say that we were talking about sensuality and these tools and kind of the intention of doing something before you started doing it. Now that, you know, if you're going to draw a box or you're going to, so just to digress, but I, in undergraduate school, had teachers from the Basel School of Design. And first semester with Inga Druckery, who's also made a nice movie, I think it's called Learning to See or something. If you want that information, it's available like on YouTube. But our assignment was to pick a font, it was called a typeface then. Pick a typeface, and then you had to, using a 000 brush, paint a letter form. And the smallest size the letter form could be would be 10 inches tall. So like a dope, I picked Bedoni. Not having a clue the thick to thin relationship, and then trying to get it took me a whole term. I did a lowercase o. So trying to match the left curve part of it and the right that have to be, you know, identical, but nothing can be, when you're doing it by hand, be that precise. And so then from going to the sensuality of that to kind of the amount of time it took to do one thing versus the amount of things that you could see using a computer, because you could do so many iterations once you had an idea. And I wouldn't say that the thing about it is, you know, we're talking about through drawing, basically learning to see. And for me, doing that letter form was learning to see. You know, where in the beginning, you didn't know if the curve was broken or if something was too flat on the shape or something like that. But by the end of the term, now, many people completed a complete alphabet. And I had my 3-dimensional lowercase Bedoni O in my portfolio because it was about a ½ inch thick of paint. Right. It became like a sculpture or relief thing. But it really helped me. It really helped me when I finally ended up using computer, because, like, I can see if something is a pixel off, and the kids in my studio say, "I measured, it's on the guidelines," and I'll like zoom in, and they're like, "Damn, it is off." You know? And I attribute that to that experience and also the sensuality of that. And that's something that has compelled me to keep going with the built environment, because I am dealing with real tangible material and larger scale usage and experience of color. That's my story.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Is there another question from the audience? I see a raised hand to the right.
I have the mic.
Oh, you do?
I'm good to go. I've been waiting.
Okay.
Through that wonderful story. Actually, the question I have sort of relates to that, which is, and I think April just sort of hit it, saying that she can be aware of something being a pixel off. I do believe that a computer allows for people to forget craftsmanship. But in forgetting it, then it gets ignored. And what is the best way, and maybe it is hand painting an O over the course of a semester, or maybe it's some other way, but what is, from anybody, any of the panelists or either of those of you on Skype, any other recommendations to focus on craftsmanship when it comes to design in the digital realm?
Go to a press check.
It's something I'm, oh, okay.
Oh, I just didn't hear what was said here on the panel.
Well, go to a press check. I mean, they'll keep you honest about your craft, if that's what you're speaking of in that regard.
Well, Laura says it's true, but you do have to graduate and get a job before you can be responsible to
Yeah,
go
I'm
to a
talking
press
about
check.
print. I'm sorry, see
Yeah.
how old I am.
Well, I'm a teacher also, and I've been grappling with this issue. I mean, obviously making this film makes me think about how I can help my students see things better. And so this has had me slowing down my classes quite a bit. So I've actually removed a project from each of my classes so that I can include more time for sketching and more time. And I don't care if they sketch with a Apple Pencil, but this is more about concept. This is less about craft. But I think concept is also getting a short, what do you call it? It's getting, forgotten. Yeah, we're jumping on the computer too quickly. But what April just described, that's totally something that should still be a part of a designer's education. There's no reason it shouldn't. That is how you would learn to see. And I do think that this is what I'm trying to do with my students, is really force a relationship with a hand tool, whether it is a stylus or a pencil or a pen. I do think it forces a little bit more of a relationship to what you're doing. It doesn't have to be the final piece. I mean, I'm not an illustrator. I'm not a type designer, but I do think it makes you slow down and not be distracted by software.
Yeah, I agree with the slow down idea greatly. Things are moving much faster than they should. Every student I work with is stressed with deadlines due to my fault, but by slowing down, okay, and actually not doing things last minute, looking at it again the second day, you're always going to see something you didn't see the day before. So I know that helps.
And learning to enjoy the process.
Oh, right. Yeah. It is a process, and you should enjoy it because you'll be doing it for the rest of your life.
I would also add that the printer is really important, and Tobias Farrar-Jones talked a little bit about it in the movie. Well, just the importance of printing things out. So what you see on your computer, if you're designing for print, let's just, if I'm speaking to design for print, you cannot settle for what you see on the screen. You need to be printing it out and looking at it, looking at your point sizes, looking at the relationships. It's really hard for new designers right now to understand that. They will wait until the last minute to print. Interactive design, that's another animal. So,
I think Your question is a really good one for those of us that spent a career in education and tried to figure this out, because this was one of the that's a good example of the struggle that you would have from going from analog to digital in teaching students how to use tools. But I would say this, even in light of what my earlier comment was about seeing, is that even when we were doing things with technical pens and French curves or ruling pens in the old way, there were still students that couldn't see their mistakes. That would still let something go, that wouldn't see, they just would look at it and they couldn't see that that line was crooked. And so a lot of it requires, a teacher there to say, and to print it out and to say, do you see that? I see it. Put your T-square on it, or check it out. Look at it closely. Someone to call them on it, because they can begin to learn to see that, I believe. And I believe that they're still, it's not, it's a learned skill, and I think you can learn it either with a pen tool or with a pen tool on a computer. But if there's not someone there to say, that curve isn't right, or you've got too many points on that curve, remove some of I see a bump there. I don't, what bump? I see that bump because I see the bump, right? And I can go in and I can say, there's a point there that shouldn't be there, right? They don't see that, but unless someone tells them and says, go back and look at it again, then that's really, I think, is still part of the key, because even then, if you were doing French curves and there was a bump, there would be a student that would turn something in, the bump would be there, they still didn't see it, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I was going to say, what you're describing is honing your craft.
Right.
And
having someone to help you there, and to, kind of put a standard for you.
Be the bad.
I was just going to say, yesterday in class, I had my students turn in layouts that I'd had them replicate. I had given them typographic layouts that they had to replicate, and then I held theirs over a light table to the original, and most of them were off, and it was like this, right, they all had to come up, and it was kind of fun because they were like, oh, is mine going to match up? But I thought that was a fun exercise. I think that's a fun exercise, and it shows them that's about seeing.
I like that. I think we're going to apply that in my office, Teresa, tomorrow against everyone there.
Good. Are there other people who would like to raise their hands? Okay, right there.
Just a quick question for Bryan. What inspired you to make this movie?
Mainly, I just had a lot of old production manuals that I was collecting. I do a lot of shopping at the Goodwill, and I just kept coming home with the books. But I'm also a big fan of the film Linotype, and if you guys haven't seen it, I highly suggest it. But it really brought that machine to life for me. And I thought, if I could do the same thing for the paste-up era or the cold type era, however you want to think about it, then that would be great. And so the director of that film was my mentor when I made this film.
We did show Linotype here when it first premiered, and Doug did come to the screening, and we show it every semester in design history. It's a pretty critical film, yeah. And I can see the relationship between what you're doing and what Doug did.
And he gave me a lot of the archival footage, which was given to him. So some of the money from my Kickstarter was used to digitize a lot of that footage.
Very cool. All right, go ahead.
I'm curious to back up just a little bit, some of the discussion about honing your craft and getting a sense of
of that. John, the way you describe it in terms of maybe an instructor is a good set of eyes and that can help train the students and so forth. I'm curious to call on the youth in the group here tonight and sort of hear from them in terms of that experience as being fully digital designers instead of having lived this life that we're talking about. And maybe hear their take on the film as well, because they haven't lived that life.
No, good idea. And I see a raised hand over here in the third row.
Hey Steve, is it Steve? You're from ISU, right? Yeah, I'm from Peoria, ICC with David. Good to see you. We had an awesome teacher, and he would tell us over again, like, oh, you're so lucky to have all this technology and to have this school who invests in that as well, because our school, I think not too long ago, didn't invest in the design department so much until teachers started coming along, as well as students that really cared about the students and the quality that they wanted to push out. And it's just a community college, so they also cared about where they send their students. And we would talk about that a lot. Steve visited from ISU as well. So our teacher, it was fun seeing some of the things introduced, because a lot of the students, you can get Photoshop easily, you can have a Mac easily at home, you can start on all that stuff easily and use tutorials online, but when you actually get a guide that pulls you back and says that's a tool, you need to learn these skills, and says draw this out by hand, and they're like, well, I'm not an artist. That doesn't matter. You're building a relationship with your brain and with what you're actually doing, so you're thinking about it more. And it's not to say that you're thinking about like math and the measurements involved, but the nuances of all of that stuff. So when he would tell students, like, you're gonna draw these sketches for me and turn them in like a couple days next week, and you're not gonna turn in any pencil, it's all gonna be pen. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, I can't erase my mistakes. So you have to slow down and learn that stuff. That was a lot of fun, and I'm finding that all of that built up has taught me so much more and advanced a lot of us as students at that level beyond like others that don't do that. So I still really enjoy that.
Good commentary, thank you. Yeah, we have time for one more question, I think. So might there be one last question for tonight?
I was just curious about the habits of the designers that were interviewed for the film. I mean, a lot of them obviously, well, actually all of them were in the pre-digital era. And in the film, you could see the tools that they had used. Of those designers, how many people still begin or continue their process the way they used to, versus how many of those just kind of keep the tools sitting in the studio for their next interview?
A lot of them still sketch. And like Art Chantry still does a lot of stuff by hand, but he does work on a computer. And Lucille Tenazis actually works with someone who does a lot of her production work on the computer. But most people do all their own, production work on the computer, and then they, I think most of those folks, also do their own sketching. But like Gerard Berta, the man who does the incredible lettering, he does everything digital now. But luckily for the world, he has kept everything.
Okay, good. So if there's no other absolutely urgent question that needs to be asked, we should thank our visiting guests from California.
Do you mind if I take a photo? Because I like the split screen. It looks cool.
Sure. Go right ahead. Yeah.
Also, April, I love your new glasses.
Oh, thank you.
They're awesome.
I do too.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. We had a great time chatting with you, so thank you once again, and have a really good night.
You too.
Bye, guys.